From a cop that broke down in tears after being caught drunk to a sheriff that was a literal criminal, these are some corrupt cops that had karma come back and bite them in the ass. First, let me tell you about James Hodges, a legally blind resident of Lake City. On October 31st, 2022, during what should have been an ordinary daytime stroll, James found himself stopped, searched, harassed, and ultimately arrested, without any just cause. This American veteran had his walking stick tucked into his back pocket, a medical aid officially assigned to him, but a policewoman who spotted James during his walk mistook the stick for a weapon.
What's this in your back pocket? I just saw you walking it.
It's a navigational aid. What's the problem? You a tyrant?
Yeah, I am actually. What's your name and date of birth?
Despite James's explaining and showing that the object was indeed his walking stick, the officer's suspicions didn't waver. She seemed more determined to assert her authority than to listen. James, knowing his rights, asked for her supervisor, hoping for a more reasonable approach.
I can't see it. You don't have to be a dick to me.
Well, you're being one to me.
No, sir. I'm
Have a
doing my
good day.
job.
Am I detained?
Yeah, you are. What's your name and date of birth?
It does not matter.
Yes, sir, it does.
Do you have a crime?
Would you like me
Call
to
your
put you in?
supervisor,
He's right
please.
here.
When the supervisor arrived, instead of de-escalating the situation, he doubled down. Things only got worse from there. The officers, undeterred by the fact that James was unarmed and posed no threat, continued to detain him. The body cam footage even shows the officers reaching into James's pocket without his permission, a clear violation of his rights. They eventually handcuffed and arrested James, despite his innocence. This wasn't the first time Sergeant Harrison, one of the arresting officers, had crossed the line. James ended up spending 26 hours in jail before he was finally released. The incident caught the attention of Internal Affairs, and Sheriff Mark Hunter didn't hide his discomfort with what he saw in the body cam footage. In a statement, he added he was troubled by the officer's actions. After an investigation, Harrison, who had been a sergeant, was demoted to corporal and suspended for 7 days. Gove, the officer who initiated the stop, was placed on paid administrative leave and suspended for 2 days. Both officers were also required to attend training sessions specifically focused on handling civil rights issues. However, James Hodges wasn't satisfied with just the disciplinary actions. His lawsuit argued that the entire episode stemmed from a larger issue: a policy, practice, custom, and deliberate indifference within the department, all under Sheriff Hunter's watch. The lawsuit named Hunter as a defendant as well. In the end, Hodges won his case. This is the story of 47-year-old Brian Filipiak, a lieutenant from Washtenaw County, Michigan. On November 3rd, 2016, he was pulled over in Montmorency County after police received 2 separate reports of a truck that nearly collided with several vehicles and almost ran off the road multiple times. When the officers approached his vehicle, they asked for his ID and driver's license. Brian admitted to having a couple of drinks, an unusual move for someone being pulled over. It seemed he believed his title as a lieutenant would protect him.
Okay. And then when I'm following you, you're hitting the shoulder of the road. You been drinking? How many?
But the officer wasn't swayed and asked Brian to step out of the car for a field sobriety test. As the conversation continued, Brian seemed to think he could talk his way out of the situation. Despite the officer's warnings, Brian continued to resist, pleading to be allowed to stay in his car. He repeatedly asked to be let go, saying he'd just sleep in the bushes, but the officer wasn't having it.
I'm going to ask you nicely to step out of this vehicle. Brian, my hands are tied. If I let you go, I'm going to lose my career over you. You don't think I wouldn't? This is northern Michigan.
The situation became even more troubling because it was clear that if Brian weren't a law enforcement officer, the officers likely would have dragged him out of the vehicle long before. Yet, because he was a lieutenant, they continued to try reasoning with him instead of taking more immediate action. The officer even said, "I don't want to yank you out of this vehicle," but Brian refused to cooperate.
Please step out of the vehicle for me. You know how this works.
I know.
Okay?
What's surprising is that, despite Brian's continued resistance, the officer still tried to handle the situation calmly. At one point, Officer Zachary reminded Brian that, despite being cops, they're not above the law. In the end, even with all the warnings and opportunities to cooperate, Brian still refused to step out of his car. The officers had no choice but to proceed with the arrest.
And I'm not losing my career either, so...
So, you doing exactly what you're doing is not helping your career out.
No, it's not. Well...
The entire interaction was recorded on body cam, which likely played a big role in ensuring that the officers are doing the right thing. After being pulled over, Brian seemed to think his rank would be enough to keep him out of trouble. When the officers warned him that he'd be arrested, he casually replied, "No, I won't," as if his title alone could protect him.
Fight.
You're resisting already.
No, I'm not. I just want you to let me go.
I can't.
Yes, you can.
No.
Yes, you can.
You're getting recorded.
But as the minutes ticked by, Officer Zachary's patience wore thin. After about 10 minutes of back and forth, the officer had finally had enough and ordered Brian out of the car.
Out of this vehicle. You're
No.
resisting an officer. You
No,
know
I'm
this.
not.
As Brian stumbled out of the car, it was clear just how intoxicated he was. He could barely stand straight. The officer searched him and asked if he was willing to take a sobriety test, but Brian, still trying to talk his way out. Realizing they weren't getting anywhere, Officer Zachary informed Brian that he was under arrest for refusing the test.
We're done with this.
Hold on.
Talk to me. Yes or no? Are you doing field sobriety tests?
All right, so if this was the other situation,
"No, I'm not," Brian said, still in denial. But the cuffs went on anyway, and as they led him to the police car, Brian made a last-ditch effort to get out of the situation.
You're not
no,
going to.
I'm not resisting, but let's stop.
You're
Let's talk
tensed
about
up.
But this time, the officer wasn't having it. The officer remained firm, insisting Brian sit in the back of the police car. Even then, Brian continued to resist, pleading and arguing until the officers finally had to use force to get him into the vehicle.
Just like the bug.
I'm done.
No.
In my car. In my car.
Once back at the sheriff's office, a blood test revealed Brian's blood alcohol content was 0.27, more than 3 times the legal limit of 0.08. Despite this, Brian, a 21-year veteran of the department, was placed on unpaid administrative leave during the investigation and later returned to work in a reduced role with lower pay. Essentially, he got off lightly because of his position. This is a clear example of how law enforcement officers are supposed to uphold the law, not be above it. When they betray the trust, it undermines the very system they're sworn to protect. On June 12, 2022, just after midnight, a Monroe County deputy was out on traffic duty in Key Largo, Florida. During his patrol, he spotted a white Chrysler speeding down the road at an alarming 108 miles per hour, well above the posted 45-mile-an-hour limit. The deputy quickly switched on his emergency lights, signaling for the Chrysler to pull over, but the driver didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. Instead, they continued to drive recklessly, weaving through traffic and pushing the car even faster, reaching speeds over 110 miles an hour. Finally, after a tense chase, the Chrysler came to a stop. The deputy ordered the driver to get out of the car. The driver was later identified as 26-year-old Donovan Rojas. Donovan then tries to play the "I'm Miami-Dade" police card. After handcuffing him, the deputy noticed a strong smell of alcohol coming from Donovan, along with his glassy eyes and slurred speech.
To me when I tell you to get on your f***ing knees.
Clear.
Inside the vehicle, the deputy found 2 Glock firearms, a Miami-Dade police ID and badge, a body-worn camera, a tactical vest, and other law enforcement equipment. Rojas, trying to maintain some semblance of control, said he didn't want to talk, but couldn't stop mumbling that he had pulled over as soon as he noticed the police behind him. However, he refused to take a breathalyzer test or perform any field sobriety tests.
Boss, what's your first name?
Done.
Don?
Donovan.
Donovan. That's your first name?
Yes.
Okay. Don't say anything just yet. Understand me?
Back at the station, Rojas kept insisting that he didn't try to flee, claiming he stopped as soon as he saw the lights. But the damage was done. He was charged with fleeing and eluding, along with a DUI. As reality set in, Rojas realized his career was over. The weight of it all became too much, and he broke down in tears, understanding that his time as a Miami-Dade police officer had come to an end. He was relieved of his duties without pay, marking a tragic end to what was once a respected career. This is the story of 70-year-old County Sheriff James Lujan getting arrested by his own deputies for obstructing an investigation that, ironically, was about him. It all began when Lujan sheltered former city councilor Philip Chacon, who was being hunted by the Espanola Police Department for assaulting a man. But this messy situation didn't start with Lujan's arrest. It started with Chacon hiding out. On March 26, 2020, Espanola police issued a warrant for Chacon's arrest. He stayed holed up at his house, pretending not to be home. Reports came in that he had multiple weapons, so officers couldn't just go in. They had to be cautious. During this tense standoff, Sheriff Lujan arrived on the scene. The strange part, he reeked of alcohol. Lujan, clearly not thinking straight, demanded the officers pull back and let him handle it. He claimed he'd bring Chacon out, as if he was calling the shots.
Right.
Pull everybody out. I'll bring them in.
But the officer in charge, staying calm despite Lujan's drunken state, refused to step down. She knew something wasn't right and stood her ground, even after Lujan kept pushing.
Pull them out.
Huh?
I want to pull them back.
Excuse me? I'm not asking. I'm telling you. I will bring him in. Okay?
The chaos continued when the officer in charge had to explain that Lujan had been drinking, and they couldn't trust his judgment.
Hey, the sheriff just pulled in, and he's asking us to pull back, and he'll pull him in, but he's been drinking. I can smell it on him.
Lujan, determined to take control, ignored everyone and walked up to Chacon's house, right into the danger zone, as if he were on a phone call, pretending like everything was fine. Surprisingly, after this, Chacon finally surrendered and was arrested. But the story didn't end there. The next day, investigators discovered Chacon might be connected to a man named Ramon Vigil. A search warrant was issued for Vigil's phone, and police headed to his house. Vigil was shot when the officers showed up. He tried to argue that the warrant wasn't valid, but things got even weirder when Sheriff Lujan appeared unannounced at the scene, claiming Vigil had called him for help.
The copy of the wrong one. Yo.
Now it was clear Lujan was in over his head. Investigators suspected that Lujan had been communicating with both Chacon and Vigil, trying to cover up his involvement. This led to a search warrant for Lujan's own phones, both personal and work devices. When deputies arrived at his office to serve the warrant, Lujan tried to stall, handing his phone to his undersheriff and calling his lawyer, looking for any way to get out of it. Even though Lujan kept looking for loopholes, the warrant was solid. Yet, for some strange reason, the deputies didn't force Lujan to hand over his phone right away, giving him time to possibly delete important information. As the situation grew more tense, the district attorney herself had to step in, calling Lujan's lawyer to make sure everything went smoothly. Still, Lujan continued to resist, making the whole scene even more suspicious.
Call me. Casados is not. Just for which case?
But the atmosphere shifted as the chief of the Española police finally stepped into the room. Unlike his officers, the chief wasn't in the mood to wait around. The tension in the room was palpable. The undersheriff tried to calm things down by asking the chief to pull his men back, worried that the heavy police presence might escalate the situation.
Is he gonna comply or no? So I'm sure. Waiting for his attorney to get him. Okay. He tried to call him, but he didn't. So he has the warrants. They're signed. They're legal. It's a court order. I know you guys are just doing your job, but I don't want you guys in the middle of this.
The back and forth continued, with both sides digging in. The sheriff, clearly trying to save himself from trouble, was stalling. His deputies were also trying to navigate the tricky situation, aware of the legal weight behind the court orders. After a long, tense conversation, the sheriff finally emerged from his office. The mood grew even more intense when the sheriff attempted to leave in his car.
You're not going to stop me from leaving if I want to leave. Am I under arrest?
If we have to.
Am I under arrest?
Not now.
Get away from
Not now.
The situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. Realizing he was cornered, the sheriff reluctantly handed over his phones. But the officers knew this wasn't over. They needed another warrant to actually search the phones, but they had what they came for. This is all just harassment and retaliation, the sheriff fumed, accusing the officers of targeting him because of his previous statements to the city council.
This is all harassment and retaliation because I told the city council that you shouldn't be the chief. That's what it is.
Think whatever you want.
I don't think, I know.
Okay.
That's exactly what it is.
The next day, things took a darker turn. The chief returned, this time with a search warrant for the entire sheriff's headquarters. SWAT was called in, and the building was locked down with the sheriff still inside. As tensions flared, a heated exchange took place. The sheriff, feeling the pressure, tried to push back against the officers. Soon, the sheriff knew the writing was on the wall. In the end, the sheriff was handcuffed and led away. He couldn't believe his own men were the ones arresting him, making the situation even more tragic and humiliating. Rio Arriba County Sheriff James Lujan was finally arrested. In December 2020, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for aiding a felon and intimidating a witness. All we say now is good riddance. Corrupt cops erode public trust, turning protectors into threats. Their actions compromise justice, endanger communities, and tarnish the reputation of law enforcement. Accountability and reform are crucial to restoring faith in those sworn to uphold the law. What do you think? Let us know down in the comments section below.